Thank you, everyone. I'm going to open it up to comments, questions, and motions. Councilmember Cormack.
I'd like to move that we direct staff to return with an ordinance to amend the municipal code to allow non-residents to access Foothills Park under a pilot plan and a resolution to define the pilot plan itself.
Is that the...
That's option A from the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for that? I'll second it. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I would, thank you. This is such an extraordinary year. And if I think about all of the things we've gone through in the past couple months, this is an opportunity to be more inclusive, and it just happens to be coming at a time that some people are concerned about, but this is a plan and a program that the Commission spent an entire year working on. And fundamentally for me, we turn away thousands of people every year, and the body of evidence shows that there is room for them in the park. So I think it's appropriate for us to share it. Questions would be on either side. Should we charge at all? Should we charge more? Let's let staff come back. They can give us a couple options and a range. They can listen to what we have to say this evening and reflect on what they've heard from the community. But I think I actually know that this is the right thing to do at this time.
Thanks, Councilmember Cormack. Just to my comments, this has certainly been a long-running and contentious issue in Palo Alto. The staff report notes that previous times this has come to the City Council and it's been voted down or tabled. And I'm in agreement with my colleague, Councilmember Cormack, that we have an opportunity here to fundamentally think about how we share our public spaces and the opportunities in our town, which are great. I think that's one of the wonderful things about living in Palo Alto and being raised here. I mean, I went to camp at Foothills. I've been to memorial services there. My wife and I considered having our wedding there. It is an absolute gem of this community. And I think fundamentally we are able to share that space and still maintain a pristine environment for our residents and for the limited number of visitors who would come here. You know, there are lots of arguments that this is not the time, or we have to worry about things such as fire danger or parking. I think some of this is kind of getting into, you know, reductive arguments where we'll kill it with 1,000 cuts. And I think it's important for us to be somewhat brave, but also somewhat just in opening this space up to a limited number of residents. I don't want us to derail what is obviously the right thing to do. If I think about this community in 50 or 100 years, like, well, Foothill Park, we can rename it Foothill Preserve. Like, will it still be just Palo Alto residents? I don't believe that's the right thing. And we can't restrict conditions so much that we make the trial period meaningless. I think it is, as a few have mentioned, an opportunity to learn, to get some data, to have our staff work on this and figure out what needs to be done, whether it is signage, whether it is a lower limit, whether it is restrictions on larger vehicles. I think all of that is legitimate, and we'll learn more over the year. A few other comments. Also want to thank our Parks and Recreation Commission and our community for showing up on this issue over the past year and a half. I think there's been a lot of engagement. That's a good thing. And, you know, we have two of our commissions unanimously and publicly supporting this, the Human Relations Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission. I think we need to take that seriously. I'm also really encouraged by a lot of the new voices we've seen specifically on this topic. Some of them certainly are racial justice activists, and Palo Altans may disagree with that framing. Others really care about the environmental benefits and learning and service in Foothills Park, and think it can provide a new opportunity to train environmental stewards and have volunteerism here in Palo Alto. I'm pretty proud of our faith leaders for showing up. I think they bring an important lens to this. And then also many of the youth, you know, who still live here, who don't. I'll note I've told you guys all 100 times, I'm the youngest of 6 kids. I'm the only one still here in Palo Alto. And my brothers and sisters, when they come back to Palo Alto with their kids, can't take them to Palo Alto without me, my wife, or my parents escorting them up there. And that feels weird to me. That's just odd. And I would be happy to tell my brother he has to pay $6 to get in. As for some of the issues around finances, I think this seems like a pretty minimal outlay for the city to address a long-running issue. The staff report does acknowledge there are costs, but also that staff time can be reallocated and reoriented to pursue this pretty minor pilot. And as for environmental challenges, let's see what they are. I think a number of speakers in our Parks and Recreation Commission really hit the nail on the head that it's not, environmental damage doesn't come from where somebody comes from, what city they're a resident of. It comes from what behaviors they exhibit and the number of people who are visiting their park. And I think those are two things we can control, whether it is through education, through signage, through a baseline study to figure out what's going on at the park, through an education and marketing campaign at the city level, and maybe even in partnership with our cities in Santa Clara and San Mateo County, letting them know, hey, we're welcoming your residents in a limited fashion. Will you help get the word out about good practices in our preserve? So I really encourage my colleagues to support this. This has been a tough year in many, many ways. I really hope we don't leave this issue behind again. Next, I have Councilmember Koo.
So I'd like to make a substitute motion. I'd like to put this item to a vote by the people of Palo Alto. It can possibly be on the 2022 ballot. But meanwhile, we keep this, we keep the park as it is. Then item B would be to change the name Foothill, from Foothill Park to Foothill Nature Preserve. Then 3 would be to change the misdemeanor, from misdemeanor to a citation. I think the most important point is to take it to a vote to the people of Palo Alto. I really believe that it's important that we do respect the history and the people who brought this forward. I understand that we want to do everything regional, but at the same time, it should be through the people. I did do extensive research using a survey, and there was over 1,100 people who had answered the survey, and overwhelmingly, and I think my survey actually matched Mr. Smith, Roger Smith's survey, where there were over 70. Mine showed 81% favoring keeping the park as is, especially in these times where we are in a COVID situation, and that people are going to need the open space in order to find places to go. But most importantly, it should be the voice of Palo Alto who puts this, who decides to do this. I'm sorry, I spoke before we got a second. I forgot.
So there's a substitute motion on the table. Is there a second for this? Seeing none, I believe the motion fails.
I'll second it.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Tanaka. Councilmember Koo, I believe you've spoken to this?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tanaka.
Well, for me, we're just coming off of one of the roughest budget cycles in our history. And I think we all see the storm clouds on the horizon. It's looking like it's going to be even rougher. We have a lot of things on our plate. There's a lot of, I know our staff is always giving a lot of feedback that they're really, really busy right now. And I think what's important for us is to do a few things really well. I think that, we cut what, $2-3 million out of our school. From the Coverly rent thing. It's pretty dire. So I don't think that we have just stuff laying around. I think we did a pretty thorough job at our budget hearings, and so to me, it doesn't seem like the right moment to be doing this. maybe last year when we had a lot more money, it's different. But right now I mean, you guys were part of all those budget hearings and all the people that were upset about programs that were getting cut. I mean, where would this come from? To me, it just seems not the right time. And then I also did a survey, same thing as Councilman McCoo, and my survey was also in line with everyone else's as well. So so I think it's better for the people to decide.
Councilmember Niss.
So let me see if I can, am I unmuted, I hope. Let's see if we can do a hybrid of this, because I think it's absolutely appropriate to put this on the 22 ballot. I feel very strongly that we're caretakers of this, and this truly is a very special and very oriented to the people park. I have had so much correspondence on this, and I know you all have, going in both directions. Lydia, you made the motion, Greg, you seconded it. Would you consider doing the pilot for the first year so that we have some data as we go to the people in, if we got the votes for it, in 2022?
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry. So go ahead with the pilot now.
Do and simply on D say, and do the pilot for the following year, assess it, and then use that as essentially a jumping off point for putting this on the ballot. It would give us more information about how this would work if we actually do allow more people in the park, in the nature preserve.
So there's a proposed amendment, Councilmember Koo and Tanaka.
Assess has two, you need another S. And could I say some more about this? For good or for worse, I have served a long time. You look back, you can see the number of times that this has been voted on in some way or other. 69, 73, 91, 2005. There is a long history of this being discussed and voted on and usually turned down. I'd like us to find that way to go forward, both with the experiment that does add some inclusivity, but at the same time says to those people that I know voted on the polling to not open the park, to see that they would have that opportunity to vote in 2022.
So is the proposed amendment accepted?
I think Lydia's chewing on it.
Yeah, to a certain degree, I do want to, I would like to see that, but I think that's pretty fair. Thank you, Councilmember Niss, for proposing that, and we can gather the information from there. Although I don't, I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to see, is the proposed amendment accepted? Mm-hmm. Councilmember Tanaka?
Can we also add in there to get a cost to all of this? Because I think amount is important to know before we move forward with this pilot program.
So that sounds to me like a separate thing. Let's just focus on this letter D as proposed by Councilmember Niss. Is that accepted?
Not without the cost.
And I'm fine with the cost. I think that's important.
So if we could just include in there, assess to move forward with the pilot program for the following year. I would say provide costs prior to jumping off. Oh, okay, I get it. That's all right then. Councilmember Tanaka?
So, my main concern is the budget issue, right? So, I guess Councilman Kuhn and Councilman Niss, would you guys be willing to say we keep it revenue neutral, so we're not going to be cutting you know, funding from our schools or from our libraries or from other things that we cherish in our city? Can we keep it revenue neutral? So if the fee has to be higher, then make it higher. I mean, I think the
Certainly
vice mayor, yeah, so I think we should do revenue neutral, because I just hate to go back to the community and say, oh, sorry guys, we have to cut something else because we're going to open up the park. Or, I mean, it doesn't sound right now in this kind of recession to be doing that.
Would you be okay with that? I'm okay with that, Councilmember Tanaka.
Well, it's Councilman
Mrs. Yeah, okay.
If she's okay with it, I'm okay with if we have it revenue neutral.
As I said, this is a hybrid. Doing my
Are you accepting this amendment or not?
Yes, I am, with the revenue neutral.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah,
Are you
it's revenue neutral. If Ms. accepts revenue
Are you
neutral,
accepting the amendment, yes or no?
if it has revenue neutral.
That sounds like a no to me.
Well, I guess Councilman Nis, are you willing to accept revenue neutral?
I'm fine with revenue neutral.
Okay, then yeah, we're good. So.
Councilmember Nis, anything else?
No, I know that this is somewhat messy, which is how we make, you know, it is how we get to some kind of, as I've said, hybrid like this. I'd like to say something about Greg's revenue neutral. I know that's going to be hard to do, but I think we have just made so many cuts that were so painful that if we now, our first meeting back, basically after we did the budget, we say, guess what? We've just come up with a pilot program that's going to cost $250,000, and we don't know where the money's coming from. So if we say revenue neutral on this, work with Mr. Anderson and so forth, I think that's a fair way to go about setting up the pilot.
Okay, Councilmember Cormack.
I have a few questions for staff related to this. I wonder if the clerk could tell us how much it costs to put something on the ballot?
That really depends on what else is on the ballot and how many cities are in with it and what they're putting it on, because it's all divided up within between the cities. Maybe 50,000 or so to do it. I'm not sure. I would have to check.
I feel like the last time this was brought up, there was an estimate of 150,000, but I don't know that that's for sure. That was before I was on council when you were discussing that, as I recall. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then I wonder if Mr. Anderson could answer a question. Boy, those numbers seem to have inflated over as each council member talked about it. I heard $48.5 thousand as the cost of implementing the pilot, and I heard a wish of $150,000 to restore the frozen position. Is the cost of implementing the pilot $48.5 thousand?
I'd be challenged to implement it without that position. We would be stressed very hard, and we'd be making sacrifices from other ranger duties to just have those three existing. So you would see reduction in maintenance and patrol primarily.
Okay, got it. So you said the maximum amount that the pilot might generate would be 87,000, and you thought that was unlikely, and I agree. So it seems to me that 48.5 might be in the ballpark that the, understanding there's a lot of uncertainty that the pilot might bring in from a revenue standpoint. So it might cover those, I'll call those marginal costs. Round numbers, right?
If it's helpful, as I looked at what we'd have some reasonable assurances in terms of revenue collection, if we had 25 passes on every weekend, we probably wouldn't. But if we did, and we have assurances that there's someone there to collect it, that would be $13,350 in revenue.
Okay. So I'm not hearing that this pilot is going to be revenue neutral. Does that make sense to you?
I agree.
Okay. So I think my colleagues may be forgetting the COVID-19 uncertainty reserve of $744,000 that was set aside for four purposes, the primary one of which is community services. And it's really hard for me to imagine a community service that's more important than open space during this time. So when staff comes back with a recommendation about how to fund this, we are expecting to hear back from them this month, perhaps a study session about how things are going. We're definitely expecting to hear in September and make a decision about whether or not we want to spend any of that $744,000. And I'll just refresh everyone's memory that community services was at the very top of the list of things that we were all concerned about. This is confusing to me. I don't know. Actually, my next question is for Ms. Stump, the city attorney. Can we bind a future council to bring something to the ballot?
No.
Okay, so is A actually possible?
Yes, you can bring it if the council in 2022 votes to put a measure on the ballot.
But I mean, we can't tonight say that that will happen.
That's correct.
Okay.
You can say that. You can make a statement of policy and intention, but whether to do that or not will be up to the 7 council members who are sitting at the time the matter is placed on the ballot.
Okay. Which would be 2 years from now.
You try to prepare something this far in advance to actually go on the ballot, but it is hard to see how you would do that when the point is to get extra information and data under number D by running a pilot, and that may inform exactly what it is that the council would choose to put on the ballot.
Thank you. That brings me to D, which is confusing. I'm not clear if the pilot program is to be implemented after the vote or before. It reads after. What is the following year? I wonder if perhaps Councilmember Niss could clarify the timing here.
It really should say for the coming year. It is to move forward with it as we go forward now, whether that's the coming year or the following, however we define that. So that would be for, I don't know what time. Did you have a time when the pilot would start?
No, we don't have a definitive time yet. It's based on guidance.
You imagine it would start at the beginning of the calendar year in January?
It's possible. Ideally, it's during the non-summer time where visitation's a little lower anyways.
So if we put a date on this, do we put it on for the fall? Do we put it on for the winter?
I think I need a little more time to answer that question. Look at how long it would take me to achieve some of those things that we needed, like filling that vacant position and getting the funds necessary to implement the changes we talked about.
So could we say move forward with the pilot program
for 1 year?
As soon as it is fashioned. I don't know exactly the wording to use, but as soon as it's appropriate. I think you need to tell me, Mr. Anderson, how we would define when you could start it. I would have said move forward with the pilot program this coming fall or this coming winter.
I think that's fair. Fall, winter, if you could give me a little flexibility in there.
Okay. Move forward with the pilot program starting in the fall of 2020 or the winter of 2021.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Councilmember Niss.
6 months.
And I will just say I will not be supporting this substitute motion. I don't think it's appropriate to be attempting to bind a future council, and I don't think it's going to be possible for the pilot program to be revenue neutral. I think there's an argument to be made for not charging anything at all. One of the counter arguments would be if we didn't actually have this, we wouldn't even have to staff the gate, and those rangers would be able to be doing beneficial work throughout our open space preserves. So I will not be supporting the substitute motion.
Thank you. Next, I see Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, again, thank you all for the discussion, for the motion. I appreciate that a lot of people spent a lot of time on this, and there are strong feelings on both sides. Parks and Rec spent a long time, but never really came to council to see if this was something we were interested in. And I do think our boards and commissions need to work with council rather than go off on their own. I think this motion makes a lot of sense. I think doing the pilot with policy intent to put this on the ballot makes sense. You know, the people voted to fund the park, and we should let them vote, I think, to open it up. And based on the data that's been shared, I think if the people voted now, the answer would be no. So I think the idea of doing the pilot, if we can demonstrate proper environmental management, if that can be shown, I think that's the major concern that residents have that I've heard. And so I think if we're able to run this pilot, we have that data, then I think the community will support it. And so doing the pilot before 2022 will be important. So I'm going to support the substitute motion.
Councilmember Filseth.
Thanks. Let me ask a question. What exactly is the envisionment by the maker of the motion that what goes on the 2022 ballot? Is it to continue the pilot program, or is it to expand it or reduce it, or what's the thinking? I think, you know, a number of the people who have spoken this evening clearly see this as a mechanism to sort of expand far beyond the pilot project and maybe remove restrictions on the number of people in the park at once and stuff like that. So what are you envisioning as to actually goes on the ballot?
Well, that's certainly a discussion as we move into the next couple of years. But I think based on the survey that that has been informing me is that, you know, should the Foothills Park remain for residents only, or should it be opened up completely? So I think that we need to have further assessments with the community in terms of finding out what is it that they want to see on the ballot. If it's just for opening or closing, I mean, I think that's pretty simple. Simply just yes or no.
So is that a big to be determined?
Just having the policy in place to revisit at a later time, yes, it's still a big question. I mean, what's informing me is that it should remain for residents only. But I think, you know, as council members, we shouldn't, I don't have the right to vote on the original motion. I think it should be by the voters. That's the intent of my substitute motion. And based on what comes out from the pilot, you know, that could potentially be something that goes on the ballot as well.
Okay.
One other comment. I think I'm with Councilmember Tanaka. I don't think there's any way this thing can be revenue neutral, right? I don't see where $200,000 is going to come from in order to do this. I think a number of the speakers said, you know, it's time to go beyond symbolism and take some concrete actions here. But this actually seems to me about as symbolic as it's possible to get. I mean, we got 34 other parks in town that are all open to everybody, other open space preserves. I think it's, you know, I think some people feel really passionate about this, but I think it's a really stretch to think that, to call this a racist kind of thing. You know, in my mind, something that's substantive is get rid of the mortgage interest deduction and spend the proceeds on early childhood education. This seems pretty symbolic to me. And so we're talking about spending a bunch of money on symbolism, which, you know, has its place, but, you know, normally is something that, you know, you sort of want to try to avoid in real terms. Reprioritizing CSD resources sounds to me like moving money from the children's theater to this. And so, I think we want to be pretty cautious of that.
Okay, thank you. In short, I won't be supporting the substitute motion, and I'll just talk through that quickly. So on letter A, I share Councilmember Cormack's concern both about the cost of a ballot measure and containing a future council's actions to do that. I think that's constraining, sorry, a reasonable concern. And then let's just be clear, you guys have done some informal polling, and if I were to just test the winds here in Palo Alto, I don't think opening up Foothill Park to non-residents would pass the Palo Alto ballot. And I hate to do this. I've tried to be reasonable on this, but you don't put civil rights to a vote, right? There's something significant here where we are literally discriminating against non-residents because they aren't wealthy enough to live in Palo Alto. And we're not allowing them access to open space. Is that something we really want to put on the vote? I am not for that. As for renaming Foothill Park to Foothill Nature Preserve, it's Foothills Park. And frankly, I think that should go to one of our boards and commissions. Are we really just gonna, tonight without noticing it to anybody, rename one of our parks? I don't think that follows good process or procedure. Changing the fine from a misdemeanor to an administrative citation, that's possible with the main motion, actually. And that's what it accomplishes. In terms of updating the municipal code to allow non-residents to access the park, it would make it a administrative citation. Moving forward with the pilot program, that's the main motion again. In terms of revenue neutral, I agree. It's probably not going to be revenue neutral. I don't think the costs are going to be exorbitant. And as I've mentioned a few times, staff does indicate, they indicated tonight and in the staff report, they are able to identify resources that could be shifted around to support this. And sometimes, it's not all about the money, actually. This seems like a pretty minimal cost. I think it's something we could pursue. Our boards and commissions have worked hard on this, and I think that's important to respect. Finally, I mentioned earlier about let's not miss an opportunity, and I'm always amazed at Palo Alto's ability to miss an opportunity. And it seems like we're really just chomping around the edges, misdirecting a little bit, and putting letters A, B, C, D, and E before the ethical thing to do. And so that's where I fall on this, and I'm sorry to be so stark on that. I really hoped we would have been able to take a very small step here for, I think as Councilmember Filseth mentions, maybe it's a little symbolic. I don't think this is the biggest problem in Palo Alto, but to me personally, it's certainly embarrassment at times. And I think the pilot was a very small step to begin addressing that and to honor what the environment can do for folks of different backgrounds, and also to be a good neighbor. That's a lesson Palo Alto raised me with, and I wish we could do that with our open spaces as well. So I will not be supporting the substitute motion. Are there any other comments, or should we vote on the substitute?
Mr. Mayor, may I make a quick comment?
Please.
It's regarding C, the change from fine from misdemeanor, rather than to an administrative citation. I believe it's to an infraction. Administrative citation is a technique we can issue for either of those two, just an alternative non-criminal citation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I had my hand raised for that.
Yeah, sure.
And then, if I may, Mayor?
Please.
I wanted to ask, in letter D, in addition to the cost of all the infrastructure and everything that was named, is the environmental assessment included into that for you, Mr. Anderson? Do you take that as part of the cost that we have added in there? I want to make sure that that is part of the cost, because that's the whole reason to assess, right? The measurable points is what happens with our environment and nature. What are the impacts?
Yes, thank you for that.
Do you get, so will that be part of it, or do I have to specifically add that in?
No, I'll make sure that that's in the total cost that we come up with. That and just to be clear, it's establishing a baseline of what we have that would be ongoing during the pilot period, and then some sort of follow-up analysis. Does that make sense in what you're looking for?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be good. Thank you so much.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Please.
Just to clarify, so A through E gives staff a framework for an item that will need to come back to the council. So there will need to be an ordinance. I think the way the thinking was an ordinance and a resolution. We will work out the format of it. But you will have a chance to look at this in more detail, and you will need to hear this item again and potentially have a second reading as well. So this is not your final action on this item.
Thank you. Thank you for the advisory. Councilmember Cormack, I briefly saw your hand, but now it's down.
Attorney Stump addressed my question.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no other hands, let's please vote on the substitute motion. Councilmember Niss.
Yes.
Councilmember Koo.
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
Councilmember Cormack.
No.
Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yes.
Councilmember Filseth.
Yes.
And I'm a no. So that passes on a 5-2 vote with myself and Councilmember Cormack dissenting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around and for your contributions.